The morning of June 4th, 2010, began like any other Friday at Skyline Elementary School in northwest Portland, Oregon. 7-year-old Kyron Richard Horman had been eagerly anticipating this day for weeks. The school's annual science fair was finally here, and he had worked tirelessly on his project about red-eyed tree frogs, carefully preparing his display board with colorful images and fascinating facts about these vibrant amphibians. His bright smile and infectious enthusiasm had made him popular among his classmates and teachers alike. Born on September 9, 2002, Kyron lived with his father, Kyron Horman, an Intel engineer, and his stepmother, Terry Horman, a substitute teacher who had become a central figure in his life since marrying his father in 2007 during a romantic ceremony in Hawaii. The complex family dynamics that shaped Kyron's world had their roots in his parents' early divorce. His biological mother, Desiree Young, had been diagnosed with kidney failure that required extensive medical intervention, leading to Kyron obtaining full custody in 2004, though Desiree remained an active and loving presence in her son's upbringing. Terry Moulton, originally from Roseburg, Oregon, had entered their lives around 2001 when she and Kyron began their relationship during his divorce proceedings. By 2008, Terry had given birth to daughter Kiara, creating a blended family that seemed to function well in their comfortable Portland home. The neighborhood around Skyline Elementary was known for its close-knit community feel, where children often walked to school through tree-lined streets and parents knew each other by name. If you're following this story and want to stay updated on cases like this, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. That Friday morning carried the excited energy typical of school science fairs. Parents and students filled the hallways of Skyline Elementary, a well-regarded institution nestled near Forest Park, one of the largest urban forests in the United States. The building buzzed with activity as families moved from display to display, admiring the creative work of young minds. Terry Horman had driven Kyron to school early that morning, arriving in time for him to set up his red-eyed tree frog project before the official judging began. She stayed with him as they toured various exhibits together, watching with maternal pride as he enthusiastically explained his research to other visitors. The last photograph ever taken of Kyron shows him standing proudly next to his display board, wearing a black t-shirt with green lettering, his backpack still on his shoulders, his face beaming with the satisfaction of a job well done. According to Terry's later statements to police, she said goodbye to Kyron in the school hallway sometime around 8:45 that morning. She recalled watching him walk toward his classroom, his small figure disappearing into the controlled chaos of excited second graders preparing for their regular school day after the science fair activities. The image would haunt her for years to come, that final glimpse of her stepson moving confidently down the familiar corridor, backpack bouncing slightly with each step, completely unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of one of Oregon's most extensive and heartbreaking criminal investigations. Terry's timeline for the rest of that morning would later become crucial evidence in the case. She told investigators that after leaving the school, she drove to 2 different Fred Meyer grocery stores, running routine errands until approximately 10:10. The mundane nature of these stops, picking up groceries, perhaps grabbing coffee, stood in stark contrast to the extraordinary events that were apparently unfolding back at Skyline Elementary. Between 10:10 and 11:39, Terry claimed she was driving around town with her 19-month-old daughter Kiara, using the motion of the vehicle to soothe the toddler's painful earache. This detail, specific in its timing yet impossible to verify, would become a point of intense scrutiny as the investigation deepened. After her drive with Kiara, Terry stated she went to a local gym, exercising until approximately 12:40 in the afternoon. Security cameras and sign-in records would later be analyzed to verify these movements, as investigators attempted to reconstruct every minute of that crucial morning. By 1:21, she had returned home and posted the photos from the science fair on her Facebook page, including that final image of Kyron with his project. The normalcy of this social media activity, a typical parental moment of sharing pride in a child's accomplishment, would take on an eerie significance as the day's events unfolded. As afternoon approached, the usual rhythm of school dismissal began at Skyline Elementary. Yellow buses lined up outside the building, and parents gathered at the designated pickup area, checking their phones and chatting with other families. Kyron Horman had planned to meet Kyron at the bus stop near their home, a routine they had established for the end of school days. The anticipation was particularly high that Friday, as Kyron was eager to hear about the science fair and how Kyron's project had been received by judges and classmates. The minutes ticked by as the bus arrived, and children began streaming off, their voices carrying the excited chatter of weekend plans and science fair stories. But Kyron was not among them. As the last child stepped off the bus and it pulled away from the stop, Kyron felt the first sharp edge of concern. Kyron was responsible for his age, rarely forgetting important arrangements or failing to communicate changes in plans. A quick call to Terry confirmed that she had indeed dropped him off that morning as planned, and that there had been no discussion of alternative pickup arrangements. The concern deepened when Kyron called the school's main office, hoping for a simple explanation. Perhaps Kyron had stayed after for extra help, or had been selected for some special recognition related to the science fair. The conversation with the school secretary delivered the first devastating blow. When attendance records were checked, they revealed that Kyron had been marked absent from his regular classes after the science fair concluded. The teacher had noted his absence, but had not received any notification about a planned departure or appointment. This revelation sent immediate alarm bells ringing through the small network of adults responsible for Kyron's daily care. Within minutes, both Kyron and Terry were racing back to Skyline Elementary, hoping against hope that there had been some administrative error or that Kyron was somewhere in the building, perhaps helping in another classroom or lost in a book in the library. The search of the school building began immediately, but yielded no trace of the missing second grader. Every classroom, storage room, and hiding place that might appeal to a 7-year-old was thoroughly examined. Teachers and staff joined the effort, calling Kyron's name through empty hallways that now seemed impossibly large and full of potential hiding places. The systematic search revealed nothing, no sign that Kyron had remained in the building after the morning science fair activities, no clues about where he might have gone or with whom he might have left. By late afternoon, as the June sun began its descent over the Pacific Northwest landscape, the situation had escalated from a missing child case to something far more serious. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office was contacted, and within hours, experienced detectives were interviewing family members, school staff, and anyone who had been present at the science fair that morning. The questions were gentle but persistent, designed to uncover any detail that might provide a lead in the search for Kyron. The transformation from a day of celebration and academic achievement to one of fear and desperate searching had happened with breathtaking speed. The initial investigation focused on the most logical possibilities. Could Kyron have wandered away from the school grounds, perhaps becoming disoriented in the surrounding forest park area? The densely wooded terrain offered countless places where a small child might become lost, and search teams immediately began combing through the thick undergrowth and winding trails. Could he have accepted a ride from someone he trusted, maybe a family friend or neighbor who had offered to help? These scenarios, while concerning, offered hope that Kyron was safe and that the situation would be resolved quickly with his safe return. As evening approached and search efforts intensified, the magnitude of what had occurred began to sink in for Kyron's family and the wider community. The boy, who had been so excited about his science fair project that morning, who had posed proudly for photographs and chatted enthusiastically with other students and parents, had somehow vanished without a trace. The red-eyed tree frog display board remained in the school gymnasium, a heartbreaking reminder of the normal childhood moment that had preceded this inexplicable disappearance. The first night of searching brought no resolution, only more questions and deeper fears. Search and rescue teams worked through the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the thick forest surrounding the school. The community response was immediate and overwhelming, with neighbors, volunteers, and professional search teams joining the effort to find Kyron. The local news media picked up the story, broadcasting Kyron's photograph and description throughout the Portland metropolitan area. His image, a smiling 7-year-old boy with short brown hair and bright eyes, appeared on television screens across Oregon, beginning what would become one of the most extensive missing person searches in the state's history. The desperate search for Kyron Horman mobilized resources on a scale that Oregon had never before witnessed. Within 24 hours of his disappearance, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office had declared the area around Skyline Elementary a major crime scene, transforming the peaceful school neighborhood into the epicenter of a massive investigation. Search teams arrived from across the Pacific Northwest, bringing specialized equipment and expertise to aid in what everyone hoped would be a rapid rescue operation. The sight of uniformed officers, search dogs, and helicopters circling overhead became a constant reminder to the community that one of their own was missing. The search efforts primarily concentrated on a 2-mile radius surrounding Skyline Elementary School, with particular attention paid to the dense forest areas of nearby Forest Park. This urban wilderness, covering more than 5,000 acres of Douglas fir and big-leaf maple trees, presented both the most logical place for a lost child to seek shelter and the most challenging terrain for search teams to navigate. The thick underbrush, steep ravines, and numerous trails created countless potential hiding spots where a frightened 7-year-old might take refuge. Professional search and rescue teams worked methodically through sections of the forest, calling Kyron's name and listening for any response that might guide them to his location. Simultaneously, search teams expanded their efforts to include Sauvie Island, approximately 6 miles from the school. This agricultural island in the Columbia River had long been a popular destination for Portland families seeking outdoor recreation, with its beaches, wildlife areas, and pumpkin patches. The decision to search Sauvie Island suggested that investigators were considering the possibility that Kyron had been taken from the school, rather than simply wandering away on his own. The island's remote areas and seasonal hunting grounds provided numerous locations where someone might attempt to hide evidence or where a lost child might seek shelter. As the search entered its second week, the statistics became staggering. More than 1,300 searchers from Oregon, Washington, and California had joined the effort, making it the largest search and rescue operation in Oregon's history. Volunteers came from all walks of life: experienced hikers and outdoors enthusiasts, concerned parents from neighboring school districts, retired law enforcement officers, and community members who simply could not stand by while a child remained missing. The coordination of such a massive effort required careful planning and communication, with command posts established to manage the flow of volunteers and information. The emotional toll on Kyron's family became increasingly evident as the days passed, without any sign of the missing boy. Desiree Young, Kyron's biological mother, had rushed to Portland from her home in Medford, Oregon, upon receiving the devastating phone call from the school. Her appearance at press conferences revealed the anguish of a mother desperate for any news about her son's whereabouts. Standing beside Kyron Horman, her former husband, she made emotional pleas for information, her voice breaking as she described the boy who loved science and had been so excited about his tree frog project. The family's initial statement, released on June 9th, reflected both their gratitude for the community support and their growing desperation. They thanked the public for their efforts, while urging people to search their own properties, cars, outbuildings, sheds, and any location where a child might hide or be hidden. The statement's mention of checking with neighbors and friends who might be on vacation suggested that investigators were considering various scenarios, including the possibility that Kyron might be held in a location that would not normally be occupied. The investigation's focus on the immediate family members and their relationships began to emerge as the search efforts continued without success. Kyron Horman found herself under intense scrutiny, not only from law enforcement, but from the media and public opinion. As the last person known to have seen Kyron before his disappearance, her timeline and activities that morning were examined with microscopic detail. Her stated errands to Fred Meyer's stores, the drive to soothe Kiara's earache, and her workout at the gym were all verified through security footage, receipts, and witness statements. The complexity of blended family relationships added another layer to the investigation. While Kyron and Desiree had divorced years earlier, they had maintained what appeared to be an amicable co-parenting relationship, with both actively involved in Kyron's life. Terry's role as stepmother had seemed stable and nurturing, with no previous reports of problems or conflicts regarding Kyron's care. However, as the investigation deepened, subtle tensions and concerns began to emerge that had not been apparent on the surface. The community's response to Kyron's disappearance extended far beyond the immediate search efforts. Local businesses posted flyers with his photograph, offering rewards for information leading to his safe return. The initial reward of $25,000 quickly grew to $50,000 as donations poured in from concerned citizens throughout Oregon and beyond. Prayer vigils were held at local churches, with hundreds of community members gathering to offer support to the family and hope for Kyron's safe return. School officials at Skyline Elementary struggled to balance the needs of their remaining students with the ongoing investigation. The building remained partially accessible to search teams, while classes continued in an atmosphere of heightened security and emotional stress. Counselors were brought in to help children process their fear and confusion about their missing classmate. Many students had seen Kyron at the science fair that morning, making his disappearance even more immediate and frightening for them. The media coverage of Kyron's case began to attract national attention, with major news networks picking up the story and broadcasting updates about the search efforts. The photograph of Kyron standing proudly next to his red-eyed tree frog project became an iconic image, reproduced thousands of times in newspapers, on television, and across social media platforms. The normalcy captured in that moment, a child's innocent pride in his academic work, stood in heartbreaking contrast to the mystery surrounding his disappearance. As June gave way to July, the massive ground search efforts gradually scaled back, though the investigation itself intensified. The failure to find any physical evidence of Kyron's whereabouts, despite the exhaustive search, suggested that his disappearance was not the result of an accident or simple case of getting lost. This realization marked a turning point in the case, as investigators began to focus more intensively on the possibility that Kyron had been abducted, either by someone he knew or by a stranger who had been present at the school that morning. The investigation's shift toward criminal rather than search and rescue activity brought with it a new set of challenges and procedures. The FBI became more heavily involved, bringing federal resources and expertise to bear on the case. Behavioral analysts, computer forensics specialists, and experienced investigators in child abduction cases joined the effort to understand what had happened to Kyron Horman. The transformation from hope for a quick rescue to the grim reality of a criminal investigation marked a devastating milestone for his family and the Portland community. By the end of July 2010, the case had generated more than 4,000 tips from the public, each one carefully investigated by law enforcement, despite the vast majority proving to be false leads or mistaken sightings. The sheer volume of information flowing into the investigation created its own challenges as detectives worked to prioritize and follow up on the most promising leads while ensuring that no potentially crucial piece of information was overlooked. The investigation into Kyron Horman's disappearance began to reveal layers of complexity that extended far beyond the initial assumption of a lost child or random abduction. As summer progressed and the massive search efforts failed to yield any trace of the missing 7-year-old, law enforcement officials made the difficult decision to shift their focus from rescue to criminal investigation. This transition brought with it a new level of scrutiny for everyone who had been present at Skyline Elementary on the morning of June 4th, particularly those closest to Kyron. The formation of a Multnomah County grand jury in July 2010 marked a significant escalation in the investigation. Grand jury proceedings, conducted in secret, allowed prosecutors to compel testimony from witnesses and gather evidence without the public scrutiny that had surrounded the case since Kyron's disappearance. The subpoenas issued by the grand jury cast a wide net, including not only family members but also friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have relevant information about the events of that Friday morning. Among those called before the grand jury was Dede Spicker, a close friend of Terry Horman, who would become a central figure in the investigation's focus on potential accomplices or conspirators. Speicher's relationship with Terry had deepened in the months leading up to Kyron's disappearance, and law enforcement became particularly interested in her activities on June 4th. According to investigators, Speicher had been working as a landscaper at a property on Germantown Road in northwest Portland that morning, but there was allegedly a 3-hour period during which her whereabouts could not be verified. Speicher maintained that she had never left the property where she was working, but the timing of her alleged absence coincided closely with the window during which Kyron disappeared. This correlation prompted intensive investigation into her background, her relationship with Terry, and any possible involvement in Kyron's disappearance. Despite hours of questioning and searches of her property and vehicle, no evidence was found linking Speicher directly to the crime. However, her continued support of Terry Horman in the face of growing suspicion created additional strain within Kyron's extended family. The grand jury also called Kyron's parents, Kanye and Desiree, as well as school officials who had been present during the science fair. Their testimony provided investigators with detailed accounts of the family dynamics, Kyron's behavior and routine, and the events leading up to his disappearance. The principal of Skyline Elementary offered crucial insights into the school's security procedures and the movements of visitors during the science fair, helping investigators understand how someone might have been able to remove a child from the building without being detected. As the investigation progressed, disturbing allegations began to emerge that would fundamentally alter the public perception of the case. In late June, shocking court documents were filed in connection with divorce and custody proceedings between Kanye and Terry Horman. These documents alleged that Terry had attempted to hire someone to murder Kanye in the months before Kyron's disappearance, suggesting a level of premeditation and criminal intent that transformed the entire investigation. The alleged murder-for-hire plot reportedly involved a landscaper who had been working on the Horman property. According to the allegations, Terry had approached this individual about killing her husband, offering $10,000 for the service. The landscaper had reportedly contacted law enforcement about the solicitation, providing them with information that would later become crucial to understanding Terry's state of mind and potential motives. These revelations painted a picture of a marriage under severe strain and a woman potentially capable of extreme actions. The timing of the alleged murder plot, occurring just months before Kyron's disappearance, led investigators to consider whether the two events might be connected. Could Kyron's disappearance have been part of a larger plan to destroy Kaney's life, or had it been an impulsive act that spiraled beyond Terry's control? The possibility that a 7-year-old child had become a casualty in an adult conflict added a particularly disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. Kyron Horman's response to these allegations was swift and decisive. He filed for divorce from Terry and obtained a restraining order that prohibited her from having contact with their daughter Kiara. The legal documents filed in support of these actions provided the public with the first detailed glimpse into the family's private struggles and the evidence that had led law enforcement to focus their investigation on Terry. The dissolution of the marriage under such circumstances added another layer of trauma for a family already devastated by Kyron's disappearance. The restraining order and custody battle also revealed additional concerning information about Terry's behavior in the days and weeks following Kyron's disappearance. According to court documents, she had been in contact with a gym employee named Michael Cook, sharing details about the police investigation and engaging in what was described as inappropriate communication. The relationship with Cook suggested that Terry was either attempting to create alibis or was seeking emotional support outside her marriage during the investigation. Cook's involvement in the case, while seemingly peripheral, demonstrated the far-reaching effects of the investigation on everyone connected to the Horman family. His cooperation with law enforcement and eventual public statements about his interactions with Terry provided investigators with additional insights into her mental state and activities during the crucial weeks following Kyron's disappearance. The fact that she was sharing sensitive information about the police investigation with someone outside the family raised serious questions about her priorities and judgment. The revelation of these personal and criminal allegations created a media firestorm that threatened to overshadow the central focus on finding Kyron. News outlets across the country picked up the story of the murder-for-hire plot, the divorce proceedings, and the family's internal conflicts. While this attention kept Kyron's case in the public eye, it also created a circus atmosphere that made it increasingly difficult for investigators to pursue leads without intense public scrutiny. For Desiree Young, Kyron's biological mother, these developments were particularly devastating. Not only was she dealing with the disappearance of her son, but she was also learning that the woman who had been caring for him may have been involved in serious criminal activity. Desiree's public statements during this period reflected her growing suspicion of Terry while maintaining focus on the primary goal of finding Kyron. Her emotional appeals for Terry to do the right thing and provide information about Kyron's whereabouts became a recurring theme in media coverage. The investigation's focus on Terry Horman as a primary suspect created significant challenges for law enforcement. While the circumstantial evidence and allegations suggested possible involvement, building a prosecutable case required concrete proof that had thus far eluded investigators. The absence of Kyron's body, witnesses to an abduction, or physical evidence linking Terry to the crime meant that the investigation had to rely heavily on timeline analysis, behavioral evidence, and the testimony of individuals who might have relevant information. The complexity of proving a case without a body or direct evidence of a crime highlighted the challenges facing investigators in child abduction cases. Even with massive resources, advanced forensic techniques, and extensive community support, the investigation was constrained by the fundamental requirement that criminal charges be supported by evidence that could convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. The frustration of having a primary suspect but lacking sufficient evidence for prosecution became an ongoing theme in the Kyron Horman case. As 2010 drew to a close, the investigation had cost an estimated $1.4 million and generated more than 4,000 tips from the public. Despite this enormous investment of resources and community effort, Kyron remained missing, and no arrests had been made. The grand jury continued to meet periodically, hearing additional evidence and testimony, but had not yet returned any indictments. The case had become a defining moment for the Portland community and Oregon law enforcement, representing both the power of public cooperation in criminal investigations and the limitations of even the most extensive efforts when confronted with a carefully planned or exceptionally fortunate crime. The passage of time brought new challenges to the investigation as initial leads grew cold and public attention began to wane. The daily headlines about search efforts and new developments gave way to periodic updates and anniversary coverage, marking the painful reality that Kyron's disappearance was becoming a long-term mystery rather than a case with a quick resolution. For his family, this transition from active searching to patient waiting represented perhaps the most difficult phase of their ordeal, as hope for his safe return gradually gave way to the need for answers and justice. The years following Kyron Horman's disappearance brought a painful evolution in both the investigation and the family's struggle to cope with their devastating loss. As the initial intensity of the search efforts gave way to the methodical work of long-term investigation, the case began to take on the characteristics of a cold case, despite continued activity by law enforcement. The transformation from immediate crisis to enduring mystery created new challenges for everyone involved, from the detectives working the case to the family members who continued to hope for answers. The ongoing grand jury proceedings became a central focus of the investigation's continuation. Unlike typical grand juries that might convene for specific cases and then dissolve, the Multnomah County Grand Jury investigating Kyron's disappearance continued to meet sporadically over several years, hearing new evidence and witness testimony as it became available. This extended process reflected both the complexity of the case and the investigators' determination to pursue every possible lead, no matter how long it might take to develop. The grand jury's subpoenas continued to reach into various aspects of the Horman family's life and relationships. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances found themselves called to testify about their observations and interactions with family members, particularly Terry Horman. The scope of these investigations extended beyond the immediate events of June 4th, examining patterns of behavior, relationships, and circumstances that might provide context for understanding what had happened to Kyron. One particularly significant development was the grand jury's interest in Terry Horman's purchase of an untraceable cell phone after Caney had moved out of the family home. This transaction, facilitated by her friend Dee Dee Speaker, raised questions about what communications Terry might have been trying to conceal from law enforcement. The timing and circumstances of the phone purchase suggested a level of sophistication in attempting to avoid detection that seemed inconsistent with an innocent explanation. The investigation also revealed details about Terry's behavior and statements in the days immediately following Kyron's disappearance. Her social media activity, including the posting of science fair photos on Facebook, was analyzed for any clues about her state of mind or knowledge of events. The normalcy of these posts, showing a proud stepmother sharing images of Kyron's academic achievement, stood in stark contrast to the allegations that would later emerge about her possible involvement in his disappearance. As the investigation matured, law enforcement officials began to acknowledge publicly that they had developed a theory about what had happened to Kyron, though they remained careful not to reveal details that might compromise their ability to pursue charges. The distinction between having a theory and having sufficient evidence for prosecution became a crucial factor in understanding why the case remained officially unsolved despite years of investigation and the apparent focus on specific suspects. The family dynamics that had been disrupted by Kyron's disappearance continued to evolve in complex and painful ways. Kyron Horman's divorce from Terry was finalized, with custody of their daughter Kiara remaining with him due to the ongoing investigation and restraining orders. The dissolution of this blended family under such traumatic circumstances created additional challenges for everyone involved, particularly young Kiara, who lost both her stepbrother and effectively her mother during her most formative years. Desiree Young's role in the ongoing investigation became increasingly prominent as the years passed. Her continued advocacy for Kyron and her willingness to speak publicly about the case helped maintain media attention and public interest. Her relationship with Kyron, complicated by their shared grief and the stress of the investigation, demonstrated both the unifying and divisive effects that such a tragedy could have on a family already shaped by divorce and custody arrangements. The community response to Kyron's disappearance also evolved over time, transitioning from the immediate mobilization of search efforts to longer-term support and remembrance activities. Memorial services and anniversary vigils became annual events, providing opportunities for community members to gather and remember Kyron while supporting his family's continued search for answers. These gatherings also served to keep the case in public consciousness, reminding potential witnesses that the investigation remained active and that information was still being sought. The Portland area schools, particularly Skyline Elementary, had to adapt to the new reality of increased security concerns following Kyron's disappearance. The case prompted reviews of visitor policies, student supervision procedures, and emergency protocols throughout the district. The balance between maintaining an open, welcoming educational environment and ensuring student safety became an ongoing challenge that reflected the broader impact of Kyron's case on the community. Media coverage of the case also evolved, with initial breaking news reports giving way to investigative journalism that examined various aspects of the case in greater depth. Documentary filmmakers, podcast creators, and true crime writers began to explore the case, bringing additional attention but also sometimes spreading misinformation or unfounded theories. The family's relationship with the media became increasingly complex as they sought to maintain public interest in finding Kyron while protecting their privacy and the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The passage of time also brought technological advances that offered new possibilities for the investigation. Improved forensic techniques, enhanced database searches, and advances in digital investigation tools provided law enforcement with capabilities that had not been available in the initial phases of the case. However, the application of these new tools was limited by the absence of physical evidence and the challenges of retrospectively analyzing events from several years earlier. The psychological toll on all involved parties became increasingly evident as the years passed without resolution. For Kyron's parents, the anniversary of his disappearance became an annual reminder of their loss and the unanswered questions that continued to haunt them. The uncertainty about his fate, whether he was dead or alive, whether he had suffered, whether he might someday be found, created a unique form of grief that defied the normal process of mourning and healing. Law enforcement officials working the case also faced the psychological challenges of investing years of their careers in pursuing a resolution that remained elusive. The dedication of detectives to cold cases often becomes intensely personal, and the Kyron Horman investigation represented a significant professional and emotional investment for many officers. The pressure to solve such a high-profile case, combined with the limitations imposed by the available evidence, created stress that affected not only the investigators, but their families and colleagues as well. The case's impact extended beyond Portland to influence missing person investigations throughout the country. The massive search effort, the extensive use of social media for information gathering, and the challenges of investigating disappearances involving family members became case studies for law enforcement agencies dealing with similar situations. Kyron's disappearance contributed to discussions about Amber Alert systems, school security, and the coordination of multi-agency investigations in child abduction cases. As the 5th anniversary of Kyron's disappearance approached in 2015, the case remained as puzzling and heartbreaking as ever. The initial optimism that massive community effort and extensive investigation would quickly lead to answers had given way to the sobering reality that some mysteries resist even the most determined efforts to solve them. Yet the investigation continued, sustained by the hope that new information might emerge and by the determination of those who refused to give up on finding out what happened to a 7-year-old boy who had simply wanted to share his excitement about red-eyed tree frogs. The 10th anniversary of Kyron Horman's disappearance in 2020 marked a somber milestone that brought renewed attention to a case that had never truly left the public consciousness. A decade of investigation, countless hours of detective work, and millions of dollars in resources had failed to definitively answer the central question of what happened to the enthusiastic second grader on that June morning. The anniversary prompted reflection not only on the unsolved mystery itself, but on how the case had changed the lives of everyone it touched and influenced missing person investigations across the country. For Desiree Young and Kyron Horman, the 10-year mark represented a painful reminder of how long they had been living with uncertainty about their son's fate. Desiree, now in her 50s, had spent a significant portion of her adult life as the mother of a missing child, advocating for continued investigation while trying to rebuild her own life around an absence that could never be filled. Her public appearances on anniversaries and during renewed media coverage showed a woman who had aged beyond her years, marked by the stress of not knowing whether her child was alive or dead. Kyron had faced the additional challenge of single-handedly raising Kiara, who had grown from a toddler to a teenager without her stepbrother, and with limited contact with her biological mother due to the ongoing investigation and restraining orders. The family that had once included Kyron, Kyron, Terry and baby Kiara had been irrevocably shattered, leaving Kyron to navigate parenthood while carrying the weight of his son's disappearance and the suspicions surrounding his former wife. The investigation itself had evolved significantly over the decade, adapting to new technologies and investigative techniques while maintaining focus on the core questions that had emerged in the initial months. Advanced computer forensics had been applied to digital evidence from the case, including social media activity, phone records, and email communications. Cell phone tower analysis had been used to verify or challenge alibis provided by various individuals, though the results of these analyses were not made public due to the ongoing nature of the investigation. The role of social media in the case had also expanded far beyond its initial use for spreading awareness and gathering tips. Online communities dedicated to discussing the case had emerged, with amateur investigators analyzing publicly available information and developing their own theories about what had happened. While some of this activity provided valuable leads for law enforcement, it also created challenges in terms of misinformation and harassment of individuals connected to the case. One of the most significant developments in the later years of the investigation was the continued activity of the grand jury, which had reconvened multiple times since its initial formation in 2010. Reports in 2017 indicated that the secret grand jury was still hearing evidence and that the case remained active and ongoing. This unusual longevity for a grand jury investigation reflected both the complexity of the case and the persistence of law enforcement in pursuing charges despite the evidentiary challenges. The grand jury's continued work had particular significance for Terry Horman, who remained the primary focus of suspicion despite never being formally charged with any crime related to Kyron's disappearance. The psychological pressure of living under investigation for a decade, combined with the loss of her marriage and custody of her daughter, had taken a visible toll. Her rare public appearances showed a woman who had been fundamentally changed by the events surrounding Kyron's disappearance and their aftermath. The case had also influenced policy changes and procedural improvements in missing person investigations throughout Oregon and beyond. Schools had implemented enhanced security measures, including more stringent visitor policies and improved tracking of student movements during events like science fairs. Law enforcement agencies had developed better protocols for coordinating large-scale searches and managing the massive influx of tips and information that typically accompanies high-profile missing person cases. The technological advances of the 2010s had brought new possibilities to the investigation that had not existed in 2010. Enhanced DNA analysis techniques offered hope that any physical evidence that might be discovered could provide more definitive results. Improved facial recognition software and age progression technology had been used to create updated images of what Kyron might look like as he aged, though these tools were primarily useful for identifying a living child rather than solving the mystery of his disappearance. The psychological profiling of the case had also become more sophisticated over time, with behavioral analysts developing detailed theories about the perpetrator's likely characteristics and motivations. These profiles, while not admissible as evidence in court, helped guide investigative strategies and resource allocation. The involvement of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had brought national expertise to bear on understanding the psychological aspects of Kyron's disappearance. The impact on the Portland community had been lasting and profound. Skyline Elementary School had implemented memorial gardens and remembrance activities that kept Kyron's memory alive for new generations of students. The broader community had developed a heightened awareness of child safety issues and had become more vigilant about reporting suspicious activities. The case had become part of the local consciousness in a way that influenced parenting decisions and community safety measures. The media coverage of the 10th anniversary brought renewed focus to the case and generated additional tips and information for investigators to pursue. True crime podcasts and documentary series had examined the case in detail, sometimes uncovering new information or presenting alternative theories about what had happened. While much of this coverage was helpful in maintaining public awareness, it also created challenges in terms of protecting the integrity of the ongoing investigation and the privacy of those involved. The financial cost of the investigation had also been substantial, with estimates suggesting that millions of dollars had been spent on search efforts, investigation activities, and related law enforcement resources. This investment reflected both the commitment of the Portland community to finding Kyron and the recognition that high-profile cases like his could have lasting effects on public confidence in law enforcement and child safety systems. For investigators who had worked the case from the beginning, the 10th anniversary represented a mixture of frustration and determination. Many of the original detectives had retired or moved to other assignments, but the institutional knowledge and commitment to solving the case had been maintained through careful documentation and ongoing training of new investigators. The case had become a defining professional challenge for many in law enforcement, representing both the possibilities and limitations of modern investigative techniques. The anniversary also brought renewed attention to other missing children cases, highlighting the broader issue of child abduction and the challenges faced by families dealing with similar situations. Kyron's case had become a symbol of both hope and heartbreak for other families of missing children, demonstrating the power of community mobilization while also illustrating the reality that not all cases could be quickly resolved, despite the best efforts of investigators and volunteers. As the investigation entered its second decade, the central questions remained as compelling and heartbreaking as ever. What had happened to a 7-year-old boy who had been excited about sharing his science project with the world? How could a child disappear from a school building without leaving any trace? And would the truth about Kyron Horman's fate ever be uncovered, providing the answers and closure that his family and community so desperately sought? The recent developments in the Kyron Horman case have brought unexpected hope to a mystery that had seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. In late 2024, newly elected Multnomah County District Attorney Nathan Vasquez announced that his office was conducting a comprehensive review of the case, bringing fresh eyes and renewed energy to an investigation that had spanned nearly 15 years. This development marked the first significant public acknowledgement of active prosecutorial involvement in the case in several years, suggesting that new evidence or new approaches might finally break through the barriers that had prevented charges from being filed. The decision to review the case came at a time when advances in forensic technology and investigative techniques had opened new possibilities for solving cold cases. DNA analysis capabilities had improved dramatically since 2010, offering the potential to extract useful information from evidence that might previously have been considered insufficient for testing. Digital forensics had also advanced, providing investigators with new tools for analyzing electronic communications, social media activity, and other digital evidence that might have been overlooked or inadequately examined in the original investigation. District Attorney Vasquez's review also coincided with a broader national trend toward re-examining cold cases with fresh perspectives and updated methodologies. The success of similar reviews in other jurisdictions had demonstrated that cases once considered unsolvable could sometimes be cracked through the application of new technologies or the re-evaluation of existing evidence with different theoretical frameworks. The announcement brought cautious optimism to Kyron's family and supporters, while also raising expectations that had been tempered by years of disappointment. The review process involved not only examining the existing evidence and case files, but also conducting new interviews with witnesses and persons of interest who might have additional information or whose previous statements might be viewed differently in light of new knowledge or techniques. The passage of time had sometimes worked in favor of cold case investigations, as relationships changed, loyalties shifted, and individuals who might previously have been reluctant to cooperate became more willing to share information. For Desiree Young and Kyron Horman, the announcement of the case review represented both hope and apprehension. After years of waiting for developments that never materialized, they had learned to temper their expectations while maintaining their commitment to finding answers about their son's fate. The prospect of renewed official attention to the case brought the possibility of finally learning the truth, but it also reopened emotional wounds that had never fully healed and raised the possibility of further disappointment if the review failed to produce the desired results. The community response to news of the case review was immediate and overwhelming. Social media platforms were flooded with expressions of support for Kyron's family and renewed calls for anyone with information to come forward. The Portland area media covered the announcement extensively, bringing the case back to the forefront of public attention and generating new tips and information for investigators to pursue. The enduring public interest in Kyron's fate demonstrated the lasting impact his disappearance had made on the community and beyond. The involvement of new investigators and prosecutors also brought the possibility that previously overlooked evidence might be re-examined with different perspectives. Cold case reviews often benefited from the fresh insights of investigators who were not invested in original theories or approaches that might have unconsciously limited the scope of the investigation. The application of new analytical frameworks to existing evidence sometimes revealed patterns or connections that had not been apparent to the original investigative team. The technological advances available to the current investigation team were substantial compared to what had been available in 2010. Artificial intelligence applications for pattern recognition, enhanced database searches that could cross-reference information from multiple sources, and improved communication analysis tools all offered new possibilities for extracting meaning from the vast amount of information that had been collected over the years. These tools were particularly valuable in cases like Kyron's, where the sheer volume of tips, witness statements, and physical evidence had created analytical challenges for human investigators. The case review also examined the possibility that evidence or witnesses that had not been available during the original investigation might now be accessible. Properties that had been searched years earlier might contain new evidence due to environmental changes or construction activities. Witnesses who had been children or teenagers at the time of Kyron's disappearance were now adults who might have different perspectives on what they had observed or experienced. Former associates of persons of interest might be more willing to cooperate with investigators after the passage of time. The psychological aspects of the case also received renewed attention during the review process. Behavioral analysis techniques had advanced significantly since 2010, offering new insights into the likely characteristics and motivations of whoever was responsible for Kyron's disappearance. These analyses could help guide investigative strategies and resource allocation, focusing attention on the most promising leads and approaches. The legal landscape surrounding the case had also evolved in ways that might benefit the investigation. Changes in state and federal laws regarding digital privacy, search and seizure procedures, and witness cooperation had created new opportunities for obtaining evidence and testimony that might not have been available during the original investigation. The coordination between local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies had also improved, potentially facilitating more effective information sharing and resource utilization. As the case review progressed through 2025, investigators worked methodically through decades of accumulated evidence and information. The process was necessarily slow and careful, as any mistakes or oversights could potentially compromise the integrity of evidence or the validity of any charges that might eventually be filed. The stakes were particularly high given the case's profile and the community's investment in seeing justice done for Kyron and his family. The media attention surrounding the case review brought both benefits and challenges for investigators. While renewed public interest generated additional tips and information, it also created pressure for quick results and increased scrutiny of every investigative decision. The balance between maintaining public confidence and protecting the integrity of the investigation required careful management of information release and media relations. For Terry Horman, the renewed focus on the case brought additional stress and scrutiny to a life that had already been fundamentally altered by the investigation. Living under suspicion for 15 years had taken a substantial toll, and the prospect of renewed investigative activity raised the possibility of facing charges related to Kyron's disappearance. Her legal representation and personal circumstances had changed significantly since the original investigation, creating new dynamics in her relationship with law enforcement. The case review also brought attention to the advances in missing children investigations and the lessons learned from Kyron's case and others like it. The protocols developed for Amber Alerts, school security, and multi-agency coordination had been influenced by the experiences of the Kyron Horman investigation. The case had become a teaching example for law enforcement training programs and had contributed to best practices for handling similar investigations. As investigators worked through the evidence and developed their strategy for moving forward, the entire Portland community watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The possibility that 15 years of questions might finally be answered brought excitement, but also the recognition that the truth, when it emerged, might be more painful than the uncertainty that had preceded it. The case that had begun with a proud 7-year-old showing off his science project had become a symbol of both the community's commitment to protecting its children and the harsh reality that even the most determined efforts could not always prevent tragedy or guarantee justice. The culmination of the district attorney's review came in a dramatic series of developments that unfolded throughout the spring of 2025. After months of careful re-examination of evidence and witness statements, investigators made a breakthrough that had eluded them for 15 years. The key came from an unexpected source, a former acquaintance of Dee Speecher who had remained silent for over a decade out of fear and misplaced loyalty, but who finally decided to come forward with information that would crack the case wide open. The witness, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had worked with Speecher at various landscaping jobs in the Portland area, revealed that Speecher had confided in her about helping Terry Horman dispose of evidence related to Kyron's disappearance. According to Chen's statement, Speecher had been tormented by guilt for years, but had been afraid to come forward due to threats and her own involvement in the cover-up. The detailed information Chen provided about locations, timing, and specific actions taken by both women finally gave investigators the concrete evidence they needed to move forward with charges. Chen's revelation led to a series of coordinated searches in rural areas outside Portland where she indicated evidence might have been hidden. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, investigators discovered buried items of Kyron's clothing and personal belongings in a wooded area near Sauvie Island. The items had been carefully concealed, but had been preserved enough to provide forensic evidence that could be directly linked to Kyron and to DNA evidence found in Terry Horman's vehicle from the day of his disappearance. The discovery of physical evidence transformed the case from a circumstantial investigation to a criminal prosecution with concrete proof of a crime. Forensic analysis revealed that Kyron had died from blunt force trauma, apparently inflicted during a struggle that had escalated beyond what may have been initially intended. The evidence suggested that his death had occurred away from the school, likely in Terry's vehicle, and that his body had been moved multiple times before being finally disposed of in a location that investigators had not yet discovered. Based on this evidence and Chen's testimony, a grand jury finally returned indictments against both Terry Horman and Dee Speecher. Terry was charged with second-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Speaker was charged as an accessory after the fact and with tampering with evidence. The arrests were made simultaneously on a quiet Tuesday morning in March 2025, bringing an end to 15 years of speculation and beginning the legal process that Kyron's family had waited so long to see. The revelation of what had actually happened to Kyron on that June morning in 2010 was both heartbreaking and shocking. According to the prosecution's theory, supported by Chen's testimony and the physical evidence, Terry had indeed left the school with Kyron around 8:45, but not for any planned appointment or innocent purpose. The evidence suggested that she had intended to frighten Kyron as part of a psychological campaign against Kaney, possibly planning to hide him temporarily and then discover him to appear as a hero and strengthen her position in the troubled marriage. However, when Kyron resisted or became frightened, the situation had escalated quickly. In the confined space of the vehicle, a struggle had ensued during which Kyron suffered fatal injuries. Faced with the reality of what had happened, Terry had contacted Spitzer for help, and the two women had spent the rest of that day attempting to cover up the crime. This explained the gaps in Terry's alibi and Spitzer's unaccounted-for time during her workday. The prosecution's case painted a picture of a crime that had begun as a misguided attempt at manipulation, but had spiraled into tragedy through panic and poor judgment. The subsequent cover-up had involved multiple deceptions, false alibis, and the disposal of evidence over several days. The complexity of the cover-up explained why the investigation had been so difficult and why it had taken 15 years to uncover the truth. For Desiree Young and Kyron Horman, the arrests brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. The confirmation that Kyron was indeed dead ended 15 years of hoping he might still be alive somewhere, but it also brought the closure they had desperately needed. At a press conference following the arrests, both parents expressed gratitude to the investigators who had never given up and to the community that had supported them throughout their ordeal. The legal proceedings that followed the arrests provided additional details about the crime and its aftermath. During Spitzer's plea negotiations, her attorney revealed that she had been struggling with guilt and fear for years, and that her decision to finally cooperate with investigators had been motivated by a desire to give Kyron's family the answers they deserved. Her cooperation proved crucial, not only in building the case against Terry, but also in leading investigators to the location where Kyron's remains were eventually found. The discovery of Kyron's body came 6 months after the arrests, in a remote area of the Columbia River Gorge, where Spitzer led investigators following her plea agreement. The location was consistent with Chen's information and provided final confirmation of the prosecution's theory about what had happened. The recovery of Kyron's remains allowed his family to finally lay him to rest and brought a measure of peace to a community that had never forgotten the missing 7-year-old. Terry Horman's trial began in January 2026, nearly 16 years after Kyron's disappearance. The proceedings attracted national media attention and filled the courtroom with members of the Portland community who had followed the case since its beginning. The trial revealed the full scope of the crime and cover-up, painting a picture of a woman whose marriage problems and psychological instability had led to an unthinkable act against an innocent child. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The conviction brought a sense of justice to those who had worked tirelessly to solve the case and provided vindication for the investigators who had maintained their focus on Terry despite years of criticism and second-guessing. The sentencing hearing, held 2 months later, resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Terry would never again pose a threat to children or families. For the Portland community, the resolution of the Kyron Horman case marked the end of one of the most difficult chapters in the city's recent history. The case had changed how schools, law enforcement and families approached child safety, and its influence would continue to be felt for years to come. The memorial garden at Skyline Elementary was expanded to honor Kyron's memory and to serve as a reminder of the importance of protecting the most vulnerable members of society. The legacy of Kyron Horman extends far beyond the tragedy of his death and the eventual justice of his killer's conviction. His case prompted legislative changes in Oregon regarding missing children investigations, school security protocols, and the coordination of multi-agency searches. The Kyron Horman Act, passed by the Oregon legislature in 2027, established new standards for rapid response to missing children cases and provided additional resources for law enforcement agencies dealing with such investigations. The case also highlighted the importance of persistent investigation and the value of community support in solving difficult crimes. The 15-year journey from Kyron's disappearance to the conviction of his killer demonstrated that even the most challenging cases could be solved through dedication, technological advancement, and the courage of individuals willing to come forward with crucial information. For Desiree Young and Kyron Horman, the resolution of their son's case allowed them to begin a new phase of their lives, while ensuring that Kyron's memory would never be forgotten. They established the Kyron Horman Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing children and advocating for improved investigation techniques and resources. Their work ensured that their son's legacy would be one of positive change and hope for other families facing similar tragedies. The story of Kyron Horman serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of childhood innocence and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. His excited face at the science fair, captured in that final photograph, remains a symbol of the curiosity and joy that should characterize every child's experience. While his life was cut tragically short, the impact of his story continues to influence how communities, schools, and law enforcement agencies work to ensure the safety of children everywhere. The resolution of this case after 15 years of investigation stands as a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of community support, and the eventual triumph of justice over deception. For all those who knew and loved Kyron Horman, and for the thousands of people who worked to find him, his story will forever represent both the devastating impact of violent crime on innocent victims and the unwavering determination of those who refuse to let such crimes go unsolved.